Welcome, everyone. Happy Wednesday. And we have some spicy drama starting to heat up in the congressional spending bill discussion because now that Elon is out of Doge, the game has changed. And he's actually criticizing the big, beautiful spending bill that has Trump's name all over it and recently just passed in Congress. So today, I'm going to give you a perspective on, first of all, what is going on and why there's such a difference of opinion on the big, beautiful bill, even among people who all voted for Trump. Because curiously, now we're in a situation where Elon is more aligned with the Democrats in opposition to the bill, although I suspect it's for different reasons. And Trump and establishment Republicans are more united in being proponents of the bill. So let's talk about the big, beautiful bill, Elon's criticism of it, and the Doge cuts. First, the big, beautiful bill, whose official name is the One Beautiful Bill Act, is a budget bill, and it just passed the House on May 31st actually May 22nd in a one vote margin. So this bill barely passed. And without getting into some of the details, it's pretty funny. There was someone who fell asleep and they missed the vote. So in another timeline, we're actually in a situation where the bill didn't pass, but it barely passed. And it's a special type of budget bill that's called a reconciliation bill. Reconciliation bills are for mandatory government spending. And mandatory spending accounted for about $4.1 trillion of the fiscal year 2024 budget. So that's about 63% of total government spending is mandatory spending. Now, for those of you who are wondering why the Doge cuts are not being discussed in this bill, is because reconciliation bills are not for the kinds of cuts that Doge is making. Doge cuts wouldn't go into that because they are cuts to discretionary spending. And again, this is a mandatory spending bill. And for context, discretionary spending was about 1.9 trillion in fiscal year 2024. So about 29% of the budget, the minority of the budget, but still a big part of the budget. And in order for the Doge cuts to be formalized, they'd need to go through a different type of bill called a rescissions bill. And Trump plans to submit a rescissions bill, but the rescissions bill that he's submitting only covers about $9.4 billion of Doge cuts. That's a really small percentage because the overall Doge bill, or it's not Doge bill, the overall Doge cuts are around $175 billion. So this might sound disappointing. I know it was disappointing for me when I heard that, but it's not the end of a journey because the president can propose additional rescissions packages to encompass all of the 174 to $175 billion of Doge cuts. And the Office of Management and Budget Director, Russell Vought, has suggested that this is the first package and it's just supposed to be a test case. So depending on the success of this rescissions bill in Congress, the administration is open to submitting more rescissions bills to formalize more of Doge's proposed cuts. And part of the reason why they're only tackling certain cuts, the majority of the cuts are foreign aid related, is because a lot of the Doge cuts are not super concrete, and it's about canceling contracts. It's about hypothetical removal of contracts that gets counted over periods of time. A lot of it can't actually be formalized in the rescissions bill quite at this point. And then there's disputes about how much of the cuts that Doge has made are hypothetical cuts versus actual cuts that can be realized. So with all of that said, in the meantime, let's talk about the big, beautiful bill. And before I do, guys, this is live, just so you know. I do not pre-record this and then stream it to you. That's why you hear my little verbal fumbles and things like that. I want to keep it super organic. So before I go, I actually can't tell sometimes if the chat is working. So is the chat working? So if you're on X or YouTube or Facebook, just let me know that it's working because we have had times in the past where I've been talking for like an hour and then I find out at the end that you can't hear me. That's the saddest thing in the world. So let's make sure that's not happening. But in the meantime, as I wait for you to reaffirm me, let's talk about the bill. So yesterday, Elon came with some heat and he said, I'm sorry, but I just can't stand it anymore. This massive, outrageous, pork-filled congressional spending bill is a disgusting abomination. Shame on those who voted for it. You know you did wrong. You know it. Wow. Tell us how you really feel, Elon. And this happened less than a week after Elon exited his role at Doge after the end of his 130-day status as a special government employee ended. And if you look at the reporting from the right, they focus on Elon leaving government because his special government employee status has ended. If you look at the reporting from the left, like New York Times, in some articles they mentioned the 130 days. In other articles, they talk about a rift growing between Trump and Elon being disillusioned with the process of trying to make government efficient. So who knows where the truth is, but we know for a fact that his 130-day status ended. So it's possible that Elon, being this bold and this raw in his criticism, is directly being influenced by him not being in the government anymore, and he doesn't have to worry about offending or undermining his temporary boss. It's kind of interesting to think of Elon as having a boss, but I guess Trump kind of was that in some limited capacity. So the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, who's a Republican, responded by saying this: I count Elon Musk as a good friend, and congressional Republicans appreciate everything he has done to put a spotlight on waste, fraud, and abuse in government. So now that Doge has identified wasteful spending, it is being quantified by the administration and codified by Congress via a rescissions process and an appropriations process. With all due respect, Elon is simply wrong about the one beautiful bill. So that's what Mike Johnson thinks. He thinks that Elon has it wrong. Now, in looking at the different sides of this issue, what's pretty clear to me is the different sides have different models for what the bill is even supposed to do, which makes this kind of frustrating because they're actually talking past each other because they have different assumptions about what the tax revenue should be and like whether the baseline tax revenue should be calculated based on the existing Trump tax cuts that are going to be extended, or whether the assumption should be based on a world in which Trump's tax cuts were not extended. So that's one of the assumptions that these two sides have different, and that's causing them to talk past another. The other assumption that has people thinking differently is the assumptions around GDP growth. So this is why there are different interpretations of it. I'm going to make this as simple as possible because it took me a while to even understand this myself. And I recognize that not everyone is here in the weeds reading all this stuff 24/7 like I am. I want to make this as simple as possible so that just by watching this video right now on this live stream, you 100% understand what's going on. Okay? Okay. In 2017, Trump passed tax cuts. And the bill that he passed the tax cuts under was called the TCJA, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. This year, those tax cuts are set to expire. So there's a vote on whether the tax cuts are going to be extended. And a large part of the tax cuts were tax cuts for corporations from 35% to 21%. The original tax cuts for individuals were reduced across most brackets, and it also doubled the standard deduction. And those cuts were originally set to expire after 2025. If the big, beautiful bill gets passed, it gets extended. This is really important to keep in mind. The big, beautiful bill contains a lot, and one of the things it includes is the extension of these tax cuts. This is going to be an important detail for later. On top of extending those Trump tax cuts from 2017, it includes additional tax cuts. So we're not going to keep on saying big, beautiful bill because it's a lot. So we call it the BBB. Adds $320 billion in additional tax cuts over 10 years, including further expensing provisions for corporations and capital gains changes. So there's the old cuts, and then there's new cuts on top of it. Now let's look at the spending side. The BBB reduces spending by about 100 or $1.6 trillion over 10 years, primarily from tightening Medicaid and SNAP. So SNAP is like food stamp eligibility. And that's according to the House Budget Committee summary. So what does this mean? This means that there's two ways to look at the tax revenue side, and there's also two ways to look at the GDP side, which I'll get into. On the tax revenue side, if you look at the big, beautiful bill as lowering tax revenue because you assume that the Trump tax cuts would not be extended, then yes, it looks like it's hurting the deficit on the revenue side. If you assume that it's actually extending the tax cuts, then it's neutral, right? This was always going to happen. But regardless of which one of those scenarios you view this bill from, there's going to be additional cuts on top. Does that make sense so far? Cool. And if it doesn't make sense, just ask me in the chat and I'll get to it once I get through all of this. Now, if we look at what the tax cuts are meant to help stimulate, from Trump's perspective, these tax cuts are needed to stimulate growth in the economy. And this is classic trickle-down economics. The idea here is that if we cut corporate taxes, then the benefits filter down into the rest of the economy. The prices of goods go down, people buy more, we have a higher GDP. There are times in which that's been proven in history. A lot of the time it's not, which makes people uncomfortable with trickle-down economic-based theory. So let's assume these spending levels, because again, the bill does cut spending. If GDP growth is modest to typical, so that's around 2 to 2.5% GDP growth, tax revenue will not go up enough to decrease the deficit. So basically, the Congressional Budget Office, CBO, estimated that they estimate around 1.8 to 2% GDP growth. In that scenario, which is modest to typical, we will actually not be able to make up enough money to decrease the deficit. Because in that case, what we've done is decrease taxes, but we didn't stimulate the economy enough. Now, note that the thing that we can control is spending, and we can control tax cuts. We can create conditions for GDP growth. We cannot control GDP growth, right? That's outside of anyone's hands. The president has influence over it, but it's not something that they can guarantee. So if GDP growth is exceptional, however, like 3.5% or above, tax revenue could go up enough to decrease the deficit. And this is important because Trump is out here promising a golden age, saying that America is going to come back roaring, our economy is going to be great, it's going to be the best ever. He's going to fix it real good. So for the Trump administration's point of view, the tax cuts are part of an overall plan that includes making energy cheaper, deregulating, maybe they're factoring in a boom in certain sectors like the AI sector to get us to 3.5% or more real GDP growth. But that's a risk because the last time that GDP growth was that high was in 2021, and that was a bit of a white swan event coming after a black swan event because we had just gotten out of COVID. So that was a post-COVID rebound. And in that year, the real GDP growth was exceptionally high, 5.9%. But the time previous to that we experienced growth that was even in the neighborhood was 2004, 17 years before, and growth was 3.8%. So let's look at the last time that Trump himself was president. When Trump was president and he passed his tax cuts in 2017, in the following years, 2018 to 2019, GDP grew at 2.9% and 2.3% respectively, which is solid, but it's not enough to offset increased spending in that time, which is why the deficit increased. So where does that leave us now? Well, we have two options. We can either reduce the deficit by dramatically reducing spending or creating the conditions for exceptional GDP growth. Spending cuts can be guaranteed. Exceptional GDP growth cannot. So if we keep 2018 through 2019 in mind, the question that politicians supporting the big, beautiful bill need to answer is this: why should we, the people, trust that this time things will be different? And this is my place of skepticism. Do I trust that Trump is going to try his best to bring a golden age to America? I do. And we've seen early positive signs that there's a lot of foreign investment and companies reshoring manufacturing in the US. And there have been trillions of dollars of investment from the Middle East and from Taiwan Semiconductor and from many other companies and countries. That's all great. That said, the economy is complicated. Someone can promise bringing a golden age to America, but if that doesn't happen, all we've actually done is cut taxes, cut our tax revenue. Yes, we did lower our spending, but not enough to make up for the loss in tax revenue. And we've left ourselves in a situation where our deficit is even higher, our debt goes even higher, and our interest rates continue to eat away at American prosperity. And given that Trump himself doesn't have a track record of reducing the debt or the deficit, and House Republicans certainly don't have a track record of doing that, yeah, it makes sense why people are very concerned here. So part of the problem here is that we're taking on risk. We're taking on risk and we're saying, okay, we're going to do something that is guaranteed to decrease our tax per person tax revenue, and that's what tax cuts do. They decrease your per person tax revenue, unless everyone starts to make more money, which is possible, but let's just assume they don't. And you're making a gamble that we're also going to make more revenue. And if we don't make more revenue, we're screwed. And there could be reasons outside of the US domestic economic policy that cause GDP growth to not happen. A war could break out somewhere else in the world. Other countries could decide to stop trading with the US. Other countries could decide to get into a trade war with the US. There are all sorts of things that are within our influence, but outside of our control that could obtain. That's a concern. And then the other problem with this, and I think this is what Elon is pointing out, is the amount of pork and extraneous stuff that we always put in these bills that simply make spending higher than it needs to be. And this is not even strictly about the deficit. This is just about every congressperson trying to get their pet project into these bills, and then these bills turn into albatrosses that no particular congressperson even reads, and then they vote on passing something that's like 1,600 pages they haven't read, and then they tell us, well, we haven't passed this. We passed this bill without reading it. We don't know what's in it, but we know that it has some cuts in spending. We're doing things for the individual, not the whole, and we're just going to count on the things that we're doing on the revenue side to make up for it. And at this point, look, whether it's Trump or any other politician, yeah, I think every American should have high degrees of skepticism and low degrees in trust that this will happen. And I say this as someone who voted for Trump and voted for Trump partially because I think he would be stronger on the economy than Kamala or Biden. But it's about having faith, but trusting and verifying. And part of the problem here is the messaging has been so disjointed around economic policy from the Trump administration that it's hard for anyone to even be able to speak cogently about what they're trying to do holistically. What is the big picture? Because look, it's not a binary. It's not as simple as this bill will guaranteed increase the debt or this bill will guaranteed decrease the debt. It's all about scenarios, right? This is economic modeling. There's a probabilistic way that we need to be thinking about this, not a binary way. So if Stephen Miller, who is a deputy chief of staff for Trump and has been saying that this bill is going to decrease the deficit, is going to say that, well, he needs to substantiate that claim by making it clear what his assumptions are. So what are your assumptions about what GDP growth will be? Do you think it's going to be 3.5%, 4%? Do you think that Trump is going to have exceptional economic growth? Okay, well, if you believe that, then A, say that clearly and tell us why. What levers are we going to be pulling and why are you confident that it's going to create GDP growth? And to be clear, I'm personally okay with us making some risky bets if those risky bets have strong rationale. But I think the average person, they don't see the rationale because the rationale has not been presented cohesively anywhere. It's a bunch of posts on X and a bunch of news headlines and a bunch of independent analyses and partisan analyses, and you don't even know where's the analysis coming from. Is a person actually unbiased? It's incredibly confusing. And amidst all that confusion, rather than be able to have a rational discussion about what's happening, it just becomes emotional. And it just becomes about who do you like and trust more? Is it Elon? Is it Trump? Is it the Republicans? Is it the Democrats? Which is no way to get people on the same page nationally. So I would like to see Trump just like make a video, literally just make a video and say, look, this is the shot that I'm calling. This is where I think we're going to be in GDP growth. This is where I think we're going to be in spending. This is where I think we're going to be in tax revenue. This is what I'm going to do to create those scenarios. I'm going to cut regulation in these industries. I'm going to drill baby drill so that power is cheaper. I'm going to unleash nuclear energy by removing regulations. I'm going to double down on renewables that are economically efficient, like solar. I'm going to double down on AI so that American companies in the AI space are making the most money, and then we're going to be taxing them, and they're going to be able to make aggressive investments, and they're going to outcompete China, and then everything's going to be great, and that's going to be the golden age of America. Say it all in one place, please, for the love of God, because I can say, as someone who is constantly trying to follow this, like, guys, I'm trying to follow this, like, I'm trying to get through the news, I'm trying to analyze this, I'm trying to read articles, I'm trying to use AI. I use like 3 different AI, and I ask them all the same question. Then I ask, when I see discrepancies, I'll like ask one, Grok, why does Claude say this, and Claude, why does ChatGPT say this? The average American doesn't have time for that. The average American doesn't have energy for that. The average American wants to get home, look at their phone, see a simple explanation of what's going on, and they'll then go have dinner with their wife or husband and kids. That's where most people are at. And again, I've said this many times, but I'm going to say it again. I think the Achilles heel of the Trump administration is that their messaging, although I think they're very transparent, ironically, there's this kind of paradox of them being the most transparent administration ever. Like, these guys do podcast interviews regularly. All members of Trump's cabinet do podcast interviews. Trump is very accessible. He's right there on X and in Truth Social. They're very transparent, but they're not very cohesive. And because they're not cohesive, a lot of the time when it gets in more complex territory, like economic policy, it just sounds disjointed. And at worst, people will say they don't have a strategy, and I don't believe that. I think they do have a strategy. I just don't think that they're very good at messaging it. And at best, people say, yeah, they have a strategy, but you kind of have to take my word for it, or read like 15 different articles and watch the 3 different videos, and no one's going to do that. So personally, I really like that Elon is speaking out. I think it's actually really healthy for Elon, now that he's outside of government, to be a countervailing influence. I'm glad that he's not just, a MAGA Trump for life. And it reminds me of what originally swung the election back last year, which is that Elon, who is someone who just thinks for himself, he wasn't some ideologue, said, hey, what the Democrats are doing is wrong, and I think Trump has a better vision for the country. And he hosted an interview with Trump. He was like, let me go learn about this guy more. And over time, you could see his conviction being raised as he got to know the guy, because he was like, oh, cool, I have more evidence. I'm going to update my view of Trump. And he's someone who I assume voted against Trump in 2016 and probably 2020 as well. I think it's healthy to have someone with that amount of influence say, hey, look, this is not even about Republicans, Democrats. This is about the people versus the establishment. And the establishment is just spending too much of our taxpayer money on a bunch of extraneous stuff and loading it into a bill that no one can read, no one understands, and no one can actually be confident is doing the right things for America. How can anyone be confident? I'm sure Trump hasn't read the bill either. I would be surprised if there's more than like 5 Congress people who have read this entire thing. So when I hear Mike Johnson say stuff like this, and I hear Stephen Miller say stuff like this, it's like, okay, you're telling me that the deficit will be lower. Show me your math. Show me your math, because me, as someone who used to vote against the Republicans all the time, and this last election voted for Trump, I'm not like some ideologue either. I'm not sitting here willing to just trust you for the sake of trusting. I do trust the intentions of Trump. Like, I'll go that far. I trust his intentions. I trust he's actually going to try to stick the landing here. But tell us what sticking the landing looks like, so that in 4 years, we're not in the same scenario. Because at the end of the day, this is one of those things where it's eventually the chickens come home to roost. Can you guys hear me now? I think we're back. My internet went out for a second there, so sorry about that. Please respond in the chat if you got me. Yes, we are back. Thank you, King Peasant. What a dichotomy of a name. So I'm not sure when I cut off, guys, but look, basically what I'm saying is the trust bank that the people have been depositing into for our politicians is very low. In fact, we might even be past very low. It might be overdrafted. There's probably negative trust right now that politicians have with the American people. And in a deficit of trust, you need to overcompensate by over explaining as simply as you can, as cohesively as you can, why you're making the decisions you're making. And yeah, I look here and it's like, yes, I can see a scenario. I can rationalize a scenario. Well, this will work out. But I'm one of the people who's paying attention to this stuff super closely, watching hours of interviews, listening to podcasts. I've had to literally compile what I think Trump's economic plan is. And I actually think it has a chance of succeeding. And there's a video on my YouTube you can check out if you want to see what Trump's economic policy is overall. But again, most people don't see that. So what we're left with is people, instead of having like the facts and a clear articulation of what the vision is, people are just being reduced down to, well, just trust your tribe. And I don't think that's good enough anymore. And yes, I agree with Elon that having this much pork, I mean, it's not even this much pork. We always put too much pork in these reconciliation bills, is fundamentally broken. We just need to stop doing that. Like, why can't we make bills not about different pet projects that random districts have, but instead about clear priorities? And right around now, I would say a clear priority should be reducing the deficit. And I understand the nuances of, hey, okay, well, if we don't do some of these tax cuts, we might not stimulate the economy. I understand some of the nuances of that, but make it clear, like, what is the target? Because what we don't want to do is end up in 2 years, 4 years from this point, looking back and saying, damn, we passed that bill and yet again the deficit increased, and we didn't hit our GDP targets, and now we're in an even worse position. So those are my thoughts on that. Let me check the chat, see what you all are saying about all this. And yeah, let's get some questions here. Also, quick plug. So for those of you who are my subscribers on X or my subscribers on Instagram or my YouTube members, thank you, because your financial contribution keeps me going. It allows me to do this and take the time, because it's a lot of time. It's pretty much a 24/7 job keeping up with this stuff and communicating it. You know, when you guys see my posts on X, some of those posts take like an hour to make. Even if it can honestly even be, I just posted about the big beautiful bill. I don't know, it was maybe a 400 word post, but it took me like a good 30, 45 minutes to make, because I really try to make sure that I'm right about everything. So yeah, I appreciate you, those of you who are financially supporting me, and I appreciate your donations and all that. And as a thank you to you, we're actually going to be doing a private Zoom hangout at 5 p.m. Pacific today. Well, you'll get to interact directly with me, ask me questions that you have. It could be about politics, it could be about culture, philosophy, personal growth, my personal life, anything you want to know. I want to meet you guys. So 5 p.m. Pacific. If you're on X and you go to the subscriber tab, if you go to my profile, go to subscriber tab, you should see my post where I posted the Zoom link. On Instagram, if you go to my story, on the private Instagram story, there's the Zoom link. And for those of you who are on my mailing list, I mailed you a link to the Zoom link, as well. So I'll see you guys at 5 p.m. Pacific today. So let's get into the questions. Sophia says, alrighty then. All right. Jane says, do you think that Elon's disagreement is only about the pork or also other parts of the bill? I don't know. I mean, he's only commented on pork more generally. I don't love to represent other people's positions. I'm just here to speak for myself. But I will speculate, this is just speculation, that Elon's concern is that in general, we are passing a bill that is not guaranteed to reduce the deficit. And although there's some math that you can like kind of squint your eyes at and say, okay, yeah, if GDP growth gets here and tax revenue is here, then it'll decrease the deficit. But it's pretty clear that the primary intention of the bill is not to decrease the deficit. And I think Elon's been pounding the table for we need to be reducing spending, period. And if you look at what he was trying to do with Doge, he was trying to reduce spending, period, right? It wasn't about hypotheticals. It was like, hey, these departments need to be downsized. These contracts need to be canceled. We need to do these things to just reduce the spending straight up. And that's not what the bill is squarely targeting. Now, again, it does reduce spending by making cuts to things like Medicaid, which is Medicaid and SNAP and entitlement programs. And I don't really have an opinion on what the cuts are because I actually don't specifically know at this point what the Medicaid cuts are and how that'll affect Americans. And I mentioned that because, you don't want to just cut anything. You want to cut the right things. But I think Elon's concern is that we are not cutting enough. Okay, there's people saying that they could hear me. Wonderful. Ray says, love you. Love you too. I heard by a congressman today that they can't cut many of the cuts in the budget. It has to be done separately by law and procedure. I'll try to find it and add it later. Yeah, so what you might be referring to is, as I said at the top of this whole little speech, there's two different types of budget bills, special budget bills. There's reconciliation bills, and that's what the big beautiful bill is. And then there's rescissions bills. Rescissions bills are about discretionary spending, and we haven't talked about that. And there'll be a point where Congress gets into the rescissions process. That's cutting discretionary spending, and discretionary spending is about 29% of government spending. The other 61% of government spending is addressed through the reconciliation bill, and that's mandatory spending. So this big, beautiful bill is about mandatory spending. So what does that mean? Well, to Ray's point, some of this needs to be done separately by law and procedure, and I think that's what you're referring to by law and procedure. It's the stuff that would happen in the rescissions bill. But we can definitely make a lot of progress just in the reconciliations process, and the concern is that our mandatory spending is too high, as well as the discretionary spending is too high. We're just spending too much, period. Okay, Bonnie Zimmerman says, well, the proof will be in the pudding if the plan of action works out. Federal monies and the use of them is different to a point from business. Some would say the BBB is a gamble, but if it works. Yeah, it is a gamble. And look, my first concern is that they're not making what the gamble is clear. And they're not being clear about it. It's like, again, I want to hear from the Trump administration and Stephen Miller, who's been speaking a lot on behalf of Trump administration. What are your assumptions? What do you think the GDP growth is going to be in 4 years by the time that Trump ends his presidency? Just tell us that. I would like to hear our leaders call their shot, say exactly what you're aiming for, and then let's see if you hit that target. One of the things I like about Trump is he calls his shot generally, like he says, this is going to be the best ever. And, he says stuff that's he's clearly missed, like he's going to end the Ukraine-Russian war before he even gets in office. And that clearly hasn't happened. But I like that he says what he's going to do and he's specific about it, but get more specific, especially when we're talking about economic terms. Tell us exactly what you think is going to happen, exactly what deficit you're aiming for. And look, I don't expect them to wipe out the deficit. This is something that's incremental. It takes time. Probably not going to remove $2 trillion of spending from the budget in a single bill, but tell us what you're trying to do. So tell us what the gamble is, because I don't even think most people know what the gamble actually is. It's like we're gambling, but we don't know what the payoff is. We don't know what the stakes are, and we don't know what the risk to reward is. So we should be able to understand that so we can make a valid bet. And if your politicians are not specific, then you shouldn't be trusting. I don't think we should just default to trust here. I don't think this is something that's complicated to articulate to the American people either. Yeah, so Ray, feel free to share that if you find it. And Bonnie, I hope that addresses your comment here. Debbie says, not sure what to think about what you presented. I know that Trump is a good businessman, so wouldn't he have taken all this into account? I would hope so. I mean, he has smart people around him. Has very successful businessmen like Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, Scott Bessent. So there's smart people around them. I'm sure they have a general plan. I'm just not really sure why they don't say it very clearly. Again, you shouldn't have to be on X and following the right people and being there at the right time of day to take that into account. So yeah, again, I think there's reasons to believe that they have a good plan, but we shouldn't have to rely on reasons to believe. We should just know what the plan is. But yeah, absolutely, you could take that into account. But like part of the problem here is, yeah, it's kind of, look, there's some people in the country who are not going to believe that Trump is ever going to accomplish a single thing he does, no matter what he says. So there's some people who they're just entrenched in their tribe as much as people who are hyper MAGA are entrenched in their tribe. Right. So there's people who will trust Trump no matter what. There's people who will not trust Trump no matter what. And there's a lot of people in the middle. A lot of people in the middle who they're open to it and they certainly want America to win, but they want to know what the plan for winning is. So one of my concerns is that the Trump administration, it feels like they're still campaigning. It feels like they're still trying to talk to their base and oftentimes focusing on rebuking the opposition rather than speaking to people who are in the middle between the positions. And I think they can win over a lot of people if their communication is just clearer. And I think this about a lot of Trump policy, especially what they're doing with the deportations of pro-Palestine protesters and anti-Semitism and the Harvard stuff. Like so much of the policy making is so confusing. And what I see the people all having to insert their own reasons into the vacuum, which is not effective. Like if people have to come up with the reasons for their president doing things, then the president's not doing a good job of giving the reasons to the people. Okay, Paul says, yay, yay. Don says, I'm back. Great. Ply says, the chickens will come home to roost is where I'll cut out. Well, I don't remember what I said after that, so hopefully you caught the important stuff. Is Trump ingenuous? That's just such a broad question. I mean, yeah, I can. He seems authentic to me. I think that he doesn't strike me as someone who lies. I think he's just someone who isn't concerned with a lot of the specifics a lot of the time, and is more concerned with being directionally correct than technically correct. But I don't think he's. It's funny. I remember he did an interview with Andrew Schulz, the comedian. It's actually a great interview before the election, and it was more of a jokey interview. And I think it was like nice as someone who wasn't super sold on Trump yet to hear that interview, because I got to see him in his element, and he's actually in comedic environments. I actually think he thrives. And he said something. He said, "I am basically a truthful person," which is funny, right? Because he was saying basically a truthful person, but there's still that. It's almost like that self-awareness. Like sometimes I don't say the truth, but he doesn't strike me as someone who's saying things that he knows to not be true willfully, which is like just outright lying. Whereas I think that a lot of the time Congress people just straight up lie. So does that mean he's never lied? No, but I think he's genuinely ingenuous. Now, whether he sticks a landing on the things that he intends to do, of course he doesn't do that all the time. But I think the things that he says he wants to do are very clear. I mean, we've known what this guy has planned to do pretty much since he stepped into the political scene. He's been talking about it for 10 years now. I think he's ingenuous in that sense. I think a better criticism here is he actually good at the execution here? And going back to 2017, he passed these tax cuts and our GDP growth was solid in 2018, 2019. It was 2.9% and 2.3% respectively, but we didn't close the deficit. It continued to balloon. So every president since Clinton has been responsible for the ballooning of our deficit. George W. Bush did it. Obama did it. Trump did it. Biden did it. Now Trump is back and he gets a chance to undo the damage that not just Democrats did, but Republicans, and he himself did it too. So yeah, I believe him to be genuine, and I believe him to be ingenuous. But the thing with character assessments is I don't know the guy, so who knows, right? Like you need to really know someone to be able to say with full certitude. But yeah, I see that. Ironically, the issue is not that he's doing one thing and saying another. The issue is that he's doing what he said he would, and people don't like that, right? Because the things that he said he would do are controversial for a lot of the country. So that's the way I look at it. Okay. So there's a comment here that's like all caps. Don't like being yelled at. So no all caps. I like, for me, honestly, this is how my brain works. A little sneak peek on like how I filter through comments. The moment I see someone personally attacking me or engaging in emotional commentary, even if it's not attacking me, or typing in all caps, I'm like, my brain just screams it out. I'm like, yeah, I'm not reading this, because we don't need to yell. We don't need to ever get into personal attacks. We don't need to be emotional in our rhetoric. And it's just a useful heuristic for me as someone who's reading through thousands of comments a day. So please, if you want to be heard, the best way to get my attention is to remain calm, to not post in all caps, to not engage in personal attacks. Even if you disagree with me, just say what you disagree with. Don't disagree with me as a human being. And we'll go from there. We can have a nice civil conversation. Yeah. Cool. And that's guidance for everyone. Let's see here. Shahida says change takes controversy. Yep, it does. And yeah, look, change, when you're trying to make change, that's inherently a divisive act. So the fact that there's controversy doesn't mean that there's a problem. The question is the change effective, and how are you managing the controversy? Are you doubling down and making things more divisive and throwing gasoline on the fire, which I do think Trump does a lot, and it's one of my criticisms of him as a leader? Or are you remaining even keeled and calm and rational even when other people are getting emotional toward you? So I think that's one mark of a great leader. And then the second thing is just doing the right thing. But I think you could do the right thing in the wrong way. So it's important to keep in mind that what you do matters, and how you do matters too, because the how of what you do determines the efficacy of the what. Right? So if you, for example, if you want to deport everyone from the country who's here illegally, there's multiple ways you could do that, right? You can either explain calmly to everyone, hey, we understand that you guys are human beings too. We understand that you came to America seeking a better life. We understand that you're just trying to do something that will make your whole ancestry and your whole bloodline lives off better, because you're coming from countries that are failed states in Central America and South America. And yet, in order to preserve America's greatness, the very thing that you tried to get into the country to participate in, we have to follow rule of law, and you broke the rule of law, and we need to remove you from the country. I'm going to give you a few options. You can either A, choose to self-deport. We're going to give you a few $1,000s so that you can deport yourself at a time and date, a time and place of your choosing. And we'll give you 6 months, a year of advance notice to do that. And then you can get back in the line for becoming a legal immigrant. Or we're going to forcefully deport you, which we don't want to have to do, but we will if necessary, because that is what is needed to make America be a place of rule and law and order. So there's a way to do that. And then I think sometimes the way that Trump does it is unnecessarily incendiary. And it hyper fixates on the genuine criminals and drug dealers and gangs and rapists who should not be in the country, period. I totally agree with him. But a lot of the time, the incessant focus on that honestly feels like an avoidance of the bigger population of illegal immigrants who are not criminals, but in my mind still should not be here. And it would just be better to engage with that group compassionately, but confident in what you're doing, and you're doing the right thing by upholding the rule of law in the country. So yeah, it's the what and the how. And people oftentimes they think it's like, oh, well, don't be so sensitive or whatever. Well, guess what? Humans are sensitive. Even people who think they're not sensitive are sensitive. They just bury their emotions deep down, and they act like they don't matter until one day they just like blow their top. But yeah, all humans are sensitive. Guess what? All humans are emotional. Your entire human experience is emotional. Every goal that you have in your life is an emotional goal. Why do people want to be rich? Because they think being rich will help them feel safe. Why do people want to be in a relationship? Because they think being in a relationship will help them feel loved. Why do people want to have status? Because they think that having status will make them feel worthy. So everything that we have is an emotional goal. Now we need to use logic in order to fulfill those goals and to create those states that will hopefully create positive emotions for us. But we're all emotional. So that's why emotional intelligence is so important in leadership. So yeah, I get that there will always be controversy. No matter what, you can be a perfect leader, by the way. You can say everything perfectly and with maximum compassion and emotional intelligence, and still there'll be people who just hate your guts, no matter what you do. But it doesn't mean that you shouldn't try, because there's many people who are open-minded enough that if your rhetoric is really precise and really graceful, they're willing to listen. So that's why I'd like to see the Trump administration communicate more clearly, communicate more comprehensively, do it without being constantly combative, and show, don't tell us what's going to happen. All right. Let's see. I'm going to read this comment because it looks like it's a compliment. I find your statements are fair and thoughtful. Do you consider yourself more of a conservationist of American values or more on the progressive thought? That's a great question. I'll go back to this debate that I had with Destiny. Honestly, I think he didn't really know much about me. And he kept in the debate, he kept on talking about conservatives and Republicans, and I was sitting there, like, okay, I get that you're like talking to this audience, but I'm here. I'm Kaizen. I'm not conservatives. I'm not Republicans. I'm an individual person giving you my individual points, and I want you to engage with that. And I told him as much during the debate. And I've been reflecting, it's like I just don't like the labels at all. Like I don't like the label conservative. I don't like the label progressive, liberal, Republican, Democrat. I mean, I'm a human being who voted for Trump in the last election, voted against him in prior elections, and we'll see what happens in the midterm elections and what's next. Like, I guess it's like, why does it even matter? Like, why can't we actually just listen to each other with beginner's mind and evaluate each thing that a person says on its own merits rather than evaluating it by reference to what label we want to ascribe the person to, or even what label they self-ascribe? So it's like, yeah, I don't know. I have beliefs that align with conservatives. I have beliefs that align with liberals. I have beliefs that align with Trump. I have beliefs that don't align with Trump. It's like I'm a person, and also I'm a growing person. I mean, my name means Kaizen. It's continuous growth. There's certain things I believe today, which I'm sure in the future I'll look back and say, yeah, I was wrong about that. Just like I feel that way about some of my past beliefs. And yeah, I just try not to think of myself as a part of any group or tribe. I think it gets in the way of any thinking. There's a really good Jiddu Krishnamurti quote, which is, the moment you teach a child the name of a bird, it will never see the bird again. And what that means is, like, let's say you have like a little 3-year-old, right? And they go outside and they see an eagle for the first time, but they don't know what an eagle is, right? They don't have any mental concept of eagle. They just see, they don't have a word for it. They just see what we call an eagle. Well, the moment you tell it that thing is an eagle, it's not fully perceiving the thing. It's perceiving that thing through reference to all the other things that we use the same name for. Right? So language is useful. I get why people use labels. It helps us communicate complex ideas really simply. But I think in politics, it gets in the way because it causes us to see people as part of a group rather than listen to what the person's actually saying. When we do that, we don't even hear each other, and we put words in each other's mouths, and we say, oh, well, you said this, but Republicans are not saying that. It's like, yeah, well, I'm not Republicans. I'm person. But yeah, I mean, last election, I registered as a Republican just so I could vote in the primaries for the next Republican race, because I think that the Republicans are just a more sane, healthy party right now. And they attract more of the talented politicians who I think could actually get things done. And I want to have an influence over the primaries. And if I didn't register for any party, then I couldn't vote in the primaries. So that's why I registered myself as Republican. But yeah, I don't consider myself Democrat or Republican. And some people think that's just being evasive, honestly, there are times where I wish I was like a Charlie Kirk and I could just say conservative values. That's what I'm here for. It's super clear and simple, but it's just not like that for me. So hopefully that answered your question, Romo. And Alexander says, thanks for the time and effort you put into this. You give a clear and relatable take. Gotta go. Thank you. I gotta go too. So thanks everyone for watching. One last plug. If you're a subscriber on X or Instagram or a YouTube member, tonight at 5 p.m. Pacific time, I'm going to be doing Kaizen Unfiltered, which is an opportunity for you to hop on Zoom in a private hangout and ask me any questions and have a conversation with me about anything that's going on in the world or your world or my world, politics, philosophy, personal growth, culture, whatever it is. So look out for that on my profile page. If you are a subscriber, but you can't find the link, just shoot me a DM. Until next time, which is going to be Friday at 1 p.m. Pacific for Nuance Live. See ya. Thanks for watching. Stay nuanced. Love each other. And again, remember that politics is not your life. It is meant to support your life. So it's serious. but it's not that serious. Peace.